Yeah, I think we're ready to make a start. If you've just joined us, good morning or afternoon, and welcome to today's webinar on using interdisciplinary data and concepts in research from the Trajetorias Project. This webinar is brought to you by the Oswaldo Cruz Foundation in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, and the Global Health Network at the University of Oxford. So the Amazon region, which is one of the most biodiverse biomes in the world, is under threat due to increasing deforestation rates, intense extraction of minerals, and implementation of large-scale agrarian systems in a fragile environment. In Brazil, this biome is home to more than 30 million inhabitants with a rich diversity of cultures. Providing economic solutions for this complex society demands ever-increasing exchanges of knowledge between academic and non-academic disciplines. The scientific synthesis project Trajetorias, hosted within the Synthesis Center on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, known as Symbiosi, has developed a framework for the joint debate of the economic, environmental, and human health solutions within the Amazon region. The Trajetorias dataset was developed linking human and environmental health to the rural techno-productive trajectorias in Amazonian municipalities. In this talk, Claudia Codeço and team will launch the Trajetorias data dashboard that allows users to visualize and interact with the indicator datasets they have produced. So this webinar aims to introduce the main goals of the Trajetorias project, present the Trajetorias dataset, including environmental, epidemiological, and economic indicators using the dashboard, and will provide a synthesis of the main results and potential uses. My name is Raquel Lowe. I'm an ICREA research professor and Global Health Resilience Group leader at the Barcelona Supercomputing Center. I'm delighted to be joined today by Claudia Codeço, who is a senior researcher in public health at the Oswaldo Cruz Foundation in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Raquel Lana, who is a postdoctoral researcher in the Global Health Resilience Group at the Barcelona Supercomputing Center. Ana Rorato, who is a postdoctoral researcher at the National Institute for Space Research in Brazil, and Paula Dal'Asta, who is also a postdoctoral researcher at the National Institute for Space Research. So welcome. Just a quick note on those of you who have joined us today. We've had over 350 registrations, mostly from Brazil, followed by Uganda, Kenya, and Nigeria. And today's agenda will start with the introductions to the panelists. And first, we will hear from Claudia Codeço, who will present to us the conceptual framework of the Trajetorias project. We will then hear from Raquel Lana on the Trajetorias dataset and the epidemiological component. We will then hear from Ana Rorato, who will speak to us about the Trajetorias dataset and the environmental component. And then we will hear from Paula Dal'Asta, who will introduce the economic component. And then we will pass back to Claudia, who will explain how this dataset is useful for policymaking. And then we will have time for an interactive session with questions and answers from the audience and the panel members. So before we begin, we just want to run through some housekeeping. So this session is being recorded, and the recording will be shared in the coming weeks on the Global Health Network platform held by Fiocruz and Latin America and the Caribbean hubs. So you will be able to review and share the materials. And these materials can be found in the link that is just being shared in the chat. So due to the number of participants, videos and microphones have been disabled. And this webinar will be held in Portuguese and English with simultaneous translations provided in both those languages and also in Spanish. So you can navigate to your toolbar and click on the language interpretation of choice and select the language you would like to listen in. Please feel free to use the chat feature to report any technical issues that you might be experiencing. and the Global Health Network Fiocruz Hub team will be able to assist you. And to interact with the panel, please use the Q&A feature to post your questions and comments. And we will have a dedicated time at the end for the questions and answers. So please do type in all your questions and we'd be very happy to take those later. So we'll now begin the program for today. Firstly, I'd like to welcome Claudia Codeço. She will be presenting the conceptual framework of the Trajetorias Project. Claudia is a senior researcher in public health at the Oswaldo Cruz Foundation and a professor of epidemiology at the National School of Public Health in Rio de Janeiro. She is a leading scientist on the epidemiology of climate-sensitive diseases, with many contributions ranging from theoretical epidemiology to applied vector-borne disease surveillance. And she is the principal investigator of the Trajetorias Project. So welcome, Claudia, and please feel free to start your presentation.
Thank you, Rachel. Oh, obrigada, Raquel. Oh, Rachel, sorry. And obrigada a todos e todas.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, everybody, for your presence here. Moving now to Portuguese. So I'll briefly present the conceptual framework of the Trajetorias Project. This project was mainly developed within the Synthesis Center, which is called Symbiose. This is one of the first synthesis centers of the Global South and the first one in Brazil. It is part of a consortium of several synthesis centers across the world. So in the world, we have an international synthesis consortium, which gathers initiatives across many countries, and Symbiose is the Brazilian initiative. So what is a synthesis center? So these are basically locations where we can seek to integrate knowledge across many subjects. So epidemiology, ecology, economy, social sciences, and many disciplines is my point. So it's data integration, concept integration, result integration, in the search for new perspectives for solving large-scale issues. This is the team of people in the Trajetorias Project. It's made up of people of several disciplines. Most of them are Brazilian from all over the country with different training backgrounds, which have gathered to discuss a very important issue for Brazil and for the planet at large, which is the Amazon region. So, when we think about the Amazon, we tend to think about the rainforest, the biodiversity, this large green region in the planet, which is one of the last biodiversity reserves in the planet. It's also important to think about it as a large water reservoir. This image on the left, I really like it because it very accurately shows how little water we actually have and that we have to manage. The large bubble corresponds to all the water in the world, and the small bubble corresponds to all of the potable water, all the drinking water. And out of all of it, 20% is in the Amazon. And the maintenance of this water, to make it accessible and consumable, it depends on the activity of the rainforest. It only exists because it is within a context of balance in the rainforest. So this environment is not just a forest. The Amazon is also a home. It is home to 24 million people only in the Brazilian Amazon. And these people live in large cities, in small villages, on the riversides, and their lives are centered on water. The transport is done through water, economics, leisure, it's all associated to the aquatic environment. However, this is something that we see, this is from this week actually, we're going through one of the worst droughts of all time. Because of it, people are not having access to water. Water simply vanished from several regions, leading to the deaths of fish, many animals, ecosystemic services, and quality of life. This is important not just for people's lives, but it is also important for the economics of Brazil, Latin America, and consequently of the country, of the world rather, because the water cycle that takes place in the Amazon affects rainfall, which affects the agribusiness and everything that water affects pretty much. So this creates a critical situation, which is our basic research question, which is how to maintain life, how to maintain water and biodiversity in the Amazon, as there's this intense process of deforestation for cattle, for large agribusiness projects. And this seems very hard to revert. And this difficulty arises from a dominating mentality that the forest is a source of poverty, of disease, and that only through the development of monocultures and deforestation it is possible to obtain wealth and health. But we need to revert this mentality. Let's move on to the next one. Okay. In a way that we can understand, measure, and bring wealth to all of these dimensions, for the forest as well as for the non-forest, so to say. We need health and wealth throughout the whole system in harmony, in a way that the forest remains standing. So we produced this theoretical framework. We brought this discussion to the group. We produced a theoretical article, a paper rather, that's available, in which we attempt to gather data from the economic side, from the health side, and from the environmental side, in order to allow for the generation of new indicators and discussions within this framework, within this approach of seeking solutions for the Amazon, which can be sustainable. This demands engaging with various actors and consequently gathering various data sets from many fronts, so economic, environmental, and from healthcare. So, we're very much based on the techno-producing technologies. Amazon is in an area where the economic activities are mainly of forestry, which is the green part, and economic activities which are based on monocultures, so agricultural monocultures, which are in orange and purple. So we try to identify which environmental trajectories are associated to these environments, so techno-productive trajectories. So, for each one of these environments, we were able to produce a conceptual framework by using these indicators. We created a data repository that can be used in order to discuss issues that are in the border of these many disciplines and build a scenario of human health and environmental health in the Amazon region. So this theoretical framework is also related with a data set, a set of indicators which were developed with two time stamps. I'll move forward and the discussion will be continued by my colleague Raquel.
Raquel, I have the great pleasure now of introducing Dr. Raquel Martins-Lana. Raquel is a postdoctoral researcher with us in the Global Health Resilience Group at the Barcelona Supercomputing Center. She's currently conducting a research visit in Brazil, and she has a degree in biology from the Federal University of Ouro Preto and a PhD in epidemiology in public health from Fiocruz. And she is involved in various research projects in the field of climate-sensitive diseases and studies related to vulnerable populations. Thank you very much, Raquel. Please feel free to go ahead.
Bom dia a todos. Bom, vou falar pouco do componente epidemiológico do Trajetórias, mas só para
speak a little bit about the epidemiological components of Trajetorias.
A nossa base de dados, né? Aqui tem
will show you how we build our database.
Explica, né, o quão
Here,
desafiador
there's a
foi
framework that explains how challenging it was
colocar todos esses conjuntos de dados que vêm de
all
diversas
this set of
fontes
data
em banco
different
só.
sources
Então,
in
como vocês
one
podem ver, por exemplo, aqui para a parte de doenças transmitidas por
databases
vetor,
only.
a
As you
gente
see, the
usou
diseases,
determinado
for that we
período,
used
né, e também isso tem a ver com o que
determined
está
period of
disponível.
time.
Para a
And
parte
also
de
it has to do with what is
transporte, a
available
parte de
for
vegetação, uso do
transportation,
solo.
vegetation.
Então, para a gente conseguir colocar isso tudo junto, tivemos que pensar muito em como harmonizar isso no tempo e no espaço. Então, aqui é só para dar uma breve introdução sobre isso.
So I just wanted to give
E
you
eu já
a quick
sigo agora
introduction
para a
here.
parte epidemiológica, se puder passar, por
And
exemplo,
I will follow now to the
próximo.
epidemiological part.
Isso, obrigada.
Next slide, please. Thank you very much.
Nós, né, coletamos e
We've collected
organizamos,
and organized
também
and harmonized
dados de doenças transmitidas
data
por vetor,
from
sendo
diseases
elas doenças de
transmitted by
Chagas,
vector,
leishmaniose
being
visceral
that
e cutânea,
Chagas disease,
dengue, malária
leishmaniasis,
falciparum, malária
dengue,
vivax
malaria
malária
vivax,
vivax mais falcíparo, que é quando
malaria vivax
ocorre
plus calcipicus, which is
as
when
duas malárias, né,
the
no mesmo
two
indivíduo, no mesmo
malarias
tempo.
occur in the same
Esses
time at the
dados,
same moment with
com
the same
exceção da
individual.
malária, vem do SINAM,
Except for
que é o Sistema de Informação de
malaria,
Agravos de Notificação.
it comes
É
from
sistema
the sources,
nacional
the
aqui do
system
Brasil,
of
e ele é
notification
público
of
e está
gravity,
disponível para
of
download.
seriousness, and
A
it's
malária vem
public
do
and it's
CIVEP,
available for
que é o
download.
Sistema de Informação
Malaria
de
comes from
Vigilância
CISEP, which is the system
Epidemiológica.
of vigilance,
Já os dados da malária,
epidemiological vigilance,
preciso
and the
notificar
malaria data
para você
is
obter,
necessary
mas
to
ainda
notify
assim,
so that you
né,
can
dado
obtain it,
disponível
but
mediante
it's an
esse
available
tipo de
data
notificação.
through this type of
Nós
notification.
organizamos esses... Volta, por favor.
We organize, can you
Nós
come back
organizamos
to the
esses
slide, please?
dados
We organize
em
this
dois
data
períodos,
in
né,
two
indo
periods,
de 2004 a
from
2008 e depois 2015
2004
a
to 2008,
2019,
and then
também
2015 up
por
to
zona
2019,
urbana e zona rural.
also by
E a
rural
partir disso,
zones,
nós
rural
calculamos
areas,
a
and urban
incidência
areas.
acumulada
And then we
nesses dois
calculated the
períodos.
incidence accumulated in these
E
two
para cada uma
periods.
dessas incidências, a gente
And for each one of
dividiu
these incidences,
a
we
população
divided
dividindo pela
population,
população do
we
meio do
divided
período,
by population
multiplicando por
from the middle of the
100.000.
period multiplied by 100,000.
Aqui a gente tem alguns exemplos
Here we have some
dos
examples
indicadores calculados
of
representados
the
em
indicators
mapas.
that were
Aqui a
calculated
gente tem
and presented
malária
in maps.
rural e
We have
urbana, e eu
rural
gostaria
and
de pedir
urban
que
malaria,
notassem a diferença de magnitude
and you see
quando
the
olhamos os
difference of
períodos de
magnitude
2004,
when we see
2008
the
e
periods
depois
of 2004 and
2015 a
2008, and then 2015
2019, né?
up
Isso tem
until
uma diferença bem
2019.
grande,
There's
sendo
a
que
huge
para o segundo
difference,
período,
being so
exceto o
that
ano de
for the second period,
2018, né,
except for the
não foram considerados
2018
anos
year,
realmente epidêmicos.
They were not
Malária,
considered
é
epidemic
importante
years.
notar também que, além da
For
diferença de
malaria,
magnitude, ou seja,
it's
teve uma
important to notice
redução
that
de casos no
besides the
segundo
difference
período,
from magnitude, we had
há
a
uma
decrease on
redução
cases in
geográfica
the second period, and there's
também
a geographic
da doença.
decrease
No entanto,
of the sickness of this disease.
ainda há uma concentração muito
But
alta de
we still have
casos
a high
na
concentration of
parte
cases
noroeste da
in the
Amazônia
northeast
e
cases of
também
the
pouco
Amazon
mais ao
and
norte.
also up
Pode
north.
passar, por favor? Aqui a gente tem o exemplo da doença de Chagas,
And here we have the
que
Chagas
também se
disease
diferencia na magnitude entre os
that
dois
also
períodos,
differs
sendo
in the
que
magnitude of the
Chagas
two
houve
periods.
aumento de casos
And in
no
this
segundo
case,
período.
Chagas disease, we had an increase
E há uma
of cases in the second
concentração
period. And there's a concentration
também na região
also
noroeste da
in the
Amazônia, que
northeast
está no
region of
estado
the
do
Amazon,
Acre, que também
that is in the state of
coincide
Acre,
com um dos
that
maiores hotspots de malária
coincides
da América
with
Latina.
one of the biggest hotspots
Também
of
tem uma
malaria
concentração
in
na
Latin
região
America.
do Pará. E
And
para
there's
Chagas,
a
uma coisa muito
concentration in
importante
the region of Pará.
é a mudança
And for
registrada no
Chagas,
padrão
also
de
something very
transmissão da
important
doença,
is what we've
que
registered
nos
in the
últimos 10,
standards
15
of
anos houve
the way the
aumento para
disease
a
is
transmissão
growing. We
oral,
had,
que
for
está
the oral
relacionada
transmission, we had
com
a
a
growth
contaminação
in the last
de
10 years
alimentos, né?
related
Então,
to
a
the
doença
food
tem uma
contamination.
redução na
So
transmissão pelo
the disease
vetor, que é
has
o
a
barbeiro,
decrease
e
on the
torna-se
transmission by
mais uma
the
doença
vector, the
de
barbaro
transmissão oral.
vector,
Pode
but
passar, por
there is an
favor.
increase in oral transmission.
Aqui a gente tem uma visão bem geral da dengue, e a
Here we have
dengue não
a general
temos
vision of dengue,
separado por zona
and
urbana
we
e
don't
rural,
have
né?
it
Os
separated
dados
by
de dengue não
urban
vêm
and
disponibilizados dessa
rural
forma.
area.
Desse
Dengue
aqui a gente
fever
consegue baixar
is the one we see
direto,
here,
né? Que está público, não vem assim.
the ones that we can
E o
download
mais
publicly.
importante aqui é
And
pensar que
here,
a dengue no
the
primeiro
most important thing is
momento,
to think
ela
that
está
dengue at first
ainda se
still
disseminando pela
is
Amazônia e está mais
disseminating
concentrada na
through
região
the
de
Amazon, and it's
transição do
more
bioma
concentrated in the
amazônico,
region of
né? E
the
que é considerado
biome
também o arco
transition
do
of the Amazon, which is
desmatamento.
considered
Mas ao
an
longo dos
arc
anos,
of
né,
the
já indo para o segundo
deforestation.
período, a gente consegue
But throughout the
observar
years, on the second period,
aumento também de
we can
dengue
observe
mais
an increase
para
of
dentro
dengue
da Amazônia, mais para o interior
deep into
da
the
Amazônia.
Amazon,
E aqui eu
on the
vou dar um
outskirts.
exemplo do
And
Acre,
here
que também é um
I'll
exemplo
give an
bem
example of
interessante
Acre, which is an
para
interesting
dengue. O
example
Acre foi
for
o
dengue.
último estado brasileiro
Acre
a
was last Brazilian state
casos
to
de dengue.
register dengue
E o
cases.
Acre, ele
And
somente
Acre,
mais ou menos em torno de 10, 15 anos
around
depois que a
10 to
maioria dos
15
estados brasileiros
years
começa a
after
registrar
all
dengue,
the
que
states
o
begin
Acre registra
registering
o seu primeiro caso,
dengue,
né? Então,
is
Rio
when
Branco,
Acre
que é a
registers
capital do
its first
estado, que está
case.
mais
So
ao
Rio
sul do
Branco,
Acre,
Acre's
só
capital,
foi registrar a
which is south
presença
of
do Aedes
Acre,
aegypti, o
just to
mosquito
register
transmissor,
Aedes
no Brasil em
aegypti, which is the transmitter
1995,
mosquito, began
enquanto a
doing
gente já
this in
registrava epidemia, por
1995
exemplo, no Rio
only,
de Janeiro
when
em
we had the same
82,
epidemic registered in
86,
Rio de
mais ou
Janeiro, for
menos, né?
example,
Isso
in
pensando nos anos
1982,
mais
1986,
recentes, nos últimos 30,
thinking
40
about
anos.
recent
E só depois de
30,
5
40
anos que foi
years.
registrada os primeiros casos
So
autóctones em Rio
only in
Branco.
1995
Então,
it
ainda não se
was
conhecia a
beginning
presença do
registering
mosquito,
cases
depois que
in
o
Acre.
mosquito
So they
chega,
didn't
depois de
know
5
about
anos a
it.
gente
So the
tem
mosquito comes,
esses casos.
and after 5 years we have these
Na
cases.
parte mais noroeste do
And in the
estado,
northeast part of
depois
the
de
state,
13 anos que se
after
registra
13
a
years,
primeira
we'll
epidemia no
have
município de
the
Cruzeiro
first
do Sul, que é
epidemic
essa parte que está
registered in
bem
the
amarelinha aí no Acre.
area of
E isso
Cruzeiro do Sul, South
foi
Cruzeiro.
bem
And that
modulado
was
pelas mudanças,
well
né,
modulated
na
by the
malha
changes
viária do
in
estado, que
the
ao longo desses anos foi
road
crescendo e foi
area
se tornando
of the
uma malha
state
viária
that
um pouco mais
began
permanente, porque, por exemplo, a
increasing and
estrada que liga o
became
sul
more
para o
permanently
noroeste do
because, for
Acre, por
example, the
vários
road
meses
that
do ano,
leads
era uma
south
estrada
to
que
the
ficava
northeast of Acre,
interrompida.
for many
Isso também tem
periods
a
of
ver
the
com o
year
aumento de
was
fluxo
blocked.
aéreo, né? Tem um
And
estudo
that
que eu
has to do
fiz
with the
durante o meu
increase of
doutorado, que a
the
gente explica e a gente
air
conta um pouco de como
flow
aconteceu esse
of
espalhamento e
transportation.
como
I
ele
have a
foi
study that
modulado
we
pelas
discussed this
mudanças
about
na
how
questão da urbanização, na questão
this
da malha
process has
viária
been
também.
impacted by the air
E também,
transportation
né,
and
como
the
eu disse, o
road
aumento da
transportation.
circulação de
And as I said,
pessoas.
the
agora,
increase
o que eu
on
gostaria também de
people's
enfatizar
circulation.
nessa parte dos
And what I
indicadores
also would like
epidemiológicos
to
é que a gente
emphasize in
precisa
the
inovar nos indicadores,
indications
né?
of
Aqui nesse
epidemiology is
trabalho a
that we
gente
have to
mostrou um
innovate.
indicador mais básico,
We
mais
showed here
tradicional
a
da
basic
epidemiologia, que é a
indicator,
incidência. Mas no nosso
which
primeiro
is
artigo que a Cláudia mencionou, a gente
reincidence.
trata isso de uma forma um pouco
But
diferente também.
we treat
Por
this
quê?
in
Por que que
a
a gente precisa
little
inovar
bit
nisso?
different
Porque,
way
principalmente quando a
because
gente quer falar de
when we want to
concorrência, a
talk
magnitude
about
das doenças,
occurrences,
ela é diferente. O que a gente
we talk
considera
about the
número,
magnitude of the
né, para
diseases,
uma
and they are different.
epidemia de uma
What we
doença é
consider
pouco
a number
diferente
for an
para
epidemiology
outra.
for one
E
disease is different
isso
for
também
another
tem
one.
a ver com a dinâmica de
And it also
transmissão
has to
dessas
do with the
doenças. Então,
dynamics
a
of
gente segue
the
nesse
transmission of these
desafio de
diseases.
encontrar
So
novos
we have this
indicadores
challenge of
epidemiológicos que
finding new
facilitem esse tipo de
epidemiological
comparação,
indicators
né? Então, a gente precisa ir para além da incidência e,
to
a partir
improve
da
this
série de casos
comparison. So we need to
de
go
uma
to the
doença, a
cases
gente pode
of
calcular
incidence,
muitos outros
and
indicadores.
from that point
E
on, we
agora, né,
can
com uma
find
parte do grupo aqui, a gente já
other
tem
indicators. And with a
trabalhado
part of this group
nesse
that we're working
tipo
here,
de inovação,
we
de indicadores. Então, em
we've been
breve, a gente
able
vai ter
to
novidades aí também,
bring this
inclusive
innovation in
com
terms of
pacotes de
indicators
R que ajuda nesse tipo
with the
de
R
cálculo,
package,
enfim.
including
Fica aí,
that will
né,
help
a
in this
semente plantada
calculation.
para a gente
So
buscar
it's
novos
a seed
indicadores
that we planted
novos indicadores
to
epidemiológicos.
improve
Agora
on
eu
how
passo
we
para
illustrate
Ana Cláudia Rorato.
this process. Now I
Obrigada.
want to pass the mic to Ana Claudia Rorato.
Thank you so much, Raquel. That's brilliant. Now we're going to pass over to our next speaker, Ana Rorato. Ana is a postdoctoral researcher at INPE in Brazil and a member of our Harmonize project. She has a degree and a bachelor in biological sciences and a master in ecology and conservation from the Federal University of Paraná, and a PhD in earth system science from INPE, where she developed an assessment of the environmental vulnerability of indigenous lands in the Brazilian Amazon. Between 2021 and 2022, she worked as a postdoctoral researcher in the Symbiosis project, and she will now share her work from that project with us now. Thank you, Ana.
Olá, pessoal. Bom dia a todos. Eu vou falar um pouco agora sobre a componente ambiental
Good morning. I will talk a little bit about
banco de
the
dados,
environmental
Trajetorias.
component in
Pode
our
passar, por favor?
databases. You can move to the next slide, please.
Obrigada. Então,
Thank you.
como Cláudia e Raquel
As Claudia
apresentaram
and Rachel have
anteriormente,
presented
a
before me,
construção, né, após a gente construir
after
framework
we built
conceitual e
a
teórico,
conceptual framework and a
para
theoretical one
conseguir entender, né, as
to
relações entre
understand
as
the
componentes
relationship
ambiental,
between the
econômica e de
environmental
saúde na
and
Amazônia,
economical and
nós
health
partimos por uma etapa
components,
de
we moved
harmonização de
on
dados
to
para
a
a construção de
harmonization
indicadores
of
que
data
conseguissem
to
representar
build
três
indicators
componentes.
that can
Aqui
represent
eu
three
apresento os
components.
indicadores que foram
Here
construídos para
I
representar a
present
componente
indicators that
ambiental.
were built for
Então,
the
a primeira
environmental
subdimensão
component.
dos
And the
nossos
first
indicadores
subdimension
está
of our
relacionada a período
indicators
de habitat, onde nós temos
has to do
indicadores
with
de
habitat loss,
desmatamento, degradação
where we have
florestal,
indicators of
áreas
deforestation,
queimadas e
degradation,
fragmentação da
burnt
vegetação.
areas,
Pode
and
passar, por favor?
fragmentation of vegetation. You can move to the next one. We also had
Nós
fire
temos
as an indicator,
indicadores para a
and we
subdimensão
have
de uso e cobertura da terra,
indicators for subdimension of
onde nós
use and coverage
representamos
of
a
the
porcentagem de
soil,
floresta remanescente nos
and we
municípios,
present
vegetação
the
secundária,
percentage
áreas
of
de
remaining forests in
pastagem,
the
áreas de agricultura,
municipalities.
áreas de
We have
mineração e áreas
the area
urbanas.
of
Pode passar?
pasture, secondary
Na
vegetation,
próxima subdimensão, nós
and in
trabalhamos
the urban and rural
a
area.
questão
And in the
de
next
meios de
dimension,
transporte, né, de
we worked
conexão e
on
deslocamento para a região amazônica.
transportation
Então, nós temos
networks,
indicadores
roads
relacionados à
network,
densidade de
indicators
rodovias,
related
densidade de
to the
hidrovias e
density
número de
of roads,
portos.
the
E,
waterways
por fim, pode
network, and the
passar, por
number of
favor?
ports. And the next
A
one,
nossa subdimensão relacionada a
the
anomalias
subdimension
climáticas
related
na
to
região amazônica,
climatic
onde nós calculamos
anomalies,
indicadores
where we
de
calculated
anomalias de precipitação
indicators
positiva,
of
precipitação
positive
negativa e temperatura
precipitation, negative
positiva.
precipitation,
Então,
and
aqui
positive
a gente tem
temperature.
alguns dos principais
And here we have some of the
dados que nós
data, the main
utilizamos,
data that we've
todos
used.
eles
All of them are data that are originated from open sources, public sources, INPE data, degrade deter, and they are related to forest coverage, and we also use data from SITS and WordClim. You can go to the next one. Here's our first example of indicators that we used. They are presented in the map form. We have here representing the subdimension of habitat loss, the percentage of deforestation accumulated for two periods, 2000 to 2006 and 2010 to 2016. Here we're talking about the deforestation of all the forestal coverage that is removed. And we can understand a big difference in the magnitude of this area of deforestation in the first period compared to the second one. And as Raquel said before, we can observe this region, the arch of deforestation, which is the area where the deforestation areas are predominant. So it's a region of intense occupation where this occupation is already consolidated historically and where we are going to have the major impacts on forestal coverage, and that were motivated by the human expansion to the region and the agro expansion mainly. But what explains this difference between the two periods, you can move on to the next one, is that here we can see in the graphics, when we look at the taxes, the annual rates of deforestation by clear cut per year. So we observed that in the first period, the period that we worked from 2000 to 2006, we had high rates of deforestation for the region, and in the second period, these rates decrease. And this is strictly related to the implementation of public policies that began taking place in 2004, where a policy and a strategy coordinated by different institutions and ministries of the Brazilian government created a rigid public policy for fighting deforestation, and that had a lot of effect, a great impact. And unfortunately, in the last years, this was abandoned, and we saw a progressive increase on the rates of deforestation. But our hope is that by recovering this policy now with the new government, we can see a decrease on this process in the next few years. Within the subdimension of habitat loss, we have other indicators of percentage of forest degradation up until 2017. The forest degradation is different than the clear-cut deforestation because degradation of forest is related to gradual loss, and it happens through the extraction, selective removal and extraction of wood. But you can see that there is a change, especially in the arch of the deforestation, and it's an environmental impact that is very important because it also participates on the process of habitat loss, and provokes structural changes in the forest that will make her more susceptible to fire. And in the second map, we see the percentage of burnt area accumulated until 2017, and also shows the predominance of this standard between fire and the border of the agro business is consolidated. So it's an environmental impact that is very important to the Amazon region. And as Claudia presented, it's a drought that was very important, a historical drought this year, and we have the increase of forestal fire as well.
Ainda dentro da subdimensão de perda de habitat, nós temos indicadores relacionados à fragmentação
We also have
florestal.
indicators
Aqui,
related
no
to
primeiro mapa, a gente
forest
observa,
fragmentation. In the first
o nosso
map,
indicador de
we
área
can
core,
observe
área
our
núcleo de
indicators,
floresta. Então, quando a
the
gente, para cada
core
município, a
area.
gente calculou
So for each
a área
municipality,
núcleo
we
do
calculated
de
the core
fragmento
area
florestal desse
of the
município.
defragmentation
Então,
of
quanto
the forest
mais
in this
verdinho
municipality,
é o
and
município, é o
as
mapa,
if it is
esse
more
município
green,
possui
the
uma
greener it is,
floresta mais íntegra. Uma
the
floresta
more
remanescente
integral
menos
is the
fragmentada.
forest, and
E
it's
o
less
segundo
fragmented.
mapa, ele é
In the
relacionado ao
second
nosso
map,
indicador de
we see a
borda,
relation
onde a gente
of
calculou a densidade de borda
borders,
para os fragmentos
the
florestais dos
quantity of
municípios.
borders
Então,
for
aqui,
the
quanto mais
forest
marronzinho
fragmentation.
é o
So
município,
the more brown it is,
fragmentado, né? Mais
more
efeito de borda
fragmented it is,
nesses
the more
fragmentos
border
florestais desse
fragmentation
município.
can be found.
Pode passar.
I'm sorry.
Na
Now
subdimensão
we
de
can
uso
go
e
to the next
cobertura
one.
da terra, nós temos os indicadores
We have for land
relacionados
use and land
à
cover,
produção
indicators
agropecuária.
related
Aqui,
to
as
the
áreas de
agro
agricultura
production.
no ano
We
de
have the areas of
2006 e
agriculture in
2017. Aqui a gente está
2006 and
falando de agricultura de larga
2017.
escala,
We're talking about
principalmente a produção
large
de
scale
grãos.
agriculture,
Então, a gente
especially
consegue
the
observar
production of grains.
aumento
So
de extensão,
we
né?
can see an increase of this extension,
Aumento da abrangência dessas
an increase
áreas
of how these areas
áreas
are
de
covered,
agricultura para a produção de
this
grãos
agriculture
do primeiro
for the
período
production
em
of grains.
relação ao segundo.
And
E a gente
from the
observa que
first
essas
period
áreas elas se
compared to
concentram
the
nessa
second
região
one,
do
and
arco
we
do
observe that
desmatamento
these
de
areas concentrate
uma região
in
onde
the
essa
area of
fronteira
this
agropecuária ela já é
deforestation
consolidada.
where this agro
Pode passar, por favor.
border is already consolidated.
Aqui o nosso indicador de pastagens. A gente também observa
This is our pasture indicator.
aumento da extensão,
We can
aqui
see an
pouco mais
increase in
sutil, de
extension, which
áreas
is
de
a little bit more
pastagem
subtle,
do período de
of
2006 para o período de
cattle
2017,
zones
e a
from
abertura de áreas de
2006 to
pastagem na região da
2017.
Amazônica,
And the
ela
opening of
está
these
fortemente associada ao
zones
processo
are
de desmatamento.
strongly
Então, é dos
associated
processos
with
que vem na
deforestation.
sequência,
So
logo
this
após a
usually
derrubada da
follows
floresta e a abertura de novas áreas.
deforestation and the opening of
Então,
new areas.
é uma atividade também
So
com
this is
bastante
also
impacto
an activity
ambiental
that has a lot
para
of
a região.
environmental impact
Pode
for the
passar,
region.
por favor. Aqui alguns indicadores relacionados
So these are
à
some
cobertura
indicators
florestal.
connected to
Então, a
vegetation
gente tem a
cover.
porcentagem de floresta
We have the
remanescente
percentage of
até o ano de
remaining
2017
forest
para
until
cada município
2017 for
e a
each
porcentagem de
municipality,
floresta
and the
secundária.
percentage of
Então,
secondary
após o
forests.
desmatamento da floresta
So after a
original,
deforestation
você tem
of the original forest,
em algumas áreas,
you can
existe,
see
né, o crescimento de
the
uma
rise
floresta
of a
secundária.
secondary
Então,
forest.
aqui ambas até o ano de
These are
2017.
both up until
Pode passar,
2017.
por favor.
Next. Okay.
Aqui também relacionado ao uso da terra,
So
nós
this is
temos
also connected to
indicadores
land use
de
somewhat.
áreas de
We have indicators
mineração.
for the advancement of
Aqui a gente
mining
está falando
activities.
de áreas de mineração
So
industrial
these are
e artesanal,
industrial
chamada
and
comumente chamada de garimpo. E o garimpo na região
industrial
amazônica, na maioria
mining
das
zones,
vezes, é realizado de forma
as well
ilegal.
as
E também
small
isso
scale
configura uma
mining,
importante
which is sometimes
ameaça
called garimpo.
ambiental e
It
social
also
nessa região.
represents a
E
strong environmental
predominantemente
threat in
acontece
this
dentro de
region. It's
territórios indígenas, que
predominantly
agrava
within
o
indigenous
seu
land,
poder de
which
impacto
aggravates its
socioambiental.
power of
Então, a
social
gente vê
environmental impact.
aumento dessas áreas do primeiro período para o segundo
We see an
período.
expansion of these
E
areas from
esse
the
é um
first
tipo
to
de
the second
atividade que
period,
tá,
and this is a type of
que tem
activity
um
that
padrão espacial bastante determinado, né?
has a
Então,
very determined
diferente dos
spatial
outros
pattern.
usos que a gente observou,
It's
a
different from the other
mineração ela
uses.
tem a sua localização mais expressiva.
Mining
Pode passar,
has
por
more
favor.
specific locations.
Aqui os nossos indicadores relacionados
So these are our
anomalias
indicators
climáticas.
connected to
Aqui,
climate
especificamente,
events and
indicador
climate
de
anomalies,
anomalia climática
specifically the
relacionada à
indicator
precipitação
for
negativa.
negative
Nós calculamos esse
precipitation.
indicador a
We
partir
calculate
de
this indicator
período
based
climatológico
on
histórico
a
de 30 anos.
historical
A
climate
gente
pattern
calculou
across 30 years.
uma média para esse
We
período
calculate
histórico
an
e a partir
average
desse período
for this
histórico nós
historical
calculamos
period,
as anomalias
and
do
based on
período de
that, we calculate the
1996
anomalies from 96 to 2006 and 2007 to 2017. What we can observe in these two maps are the municipalities in which precipitation was lower than the historical average, which would characterize a negative precipitation anomaly. And lastly, the indicator that exemplifies our transportation network subdivision, this is the road density in the two periods, 2010 and 2017. We can also observe an increase in the density of the road matrix by comparing these two images. We can also associate the spatial pattern of the presence of roads to the forest degradation and deforestation patterns. We can also relate it to agricultural activity, which become consolidated. All of these processes are interconnected, and they will somehow impact the environmental health of the region. So now I'm going to pass the floor to Ana Paula.
Thank you so much, Anna. It's very interesting. I'm now going to introduce Ana Paula Dal'Asta, who is a postdoctoral researcher at INPE and is also a member of the Harmonize project. She holds a bachelor and master's degree in geography and a PhD in remote sensing. And she's been involved in research projects focused on the interrelationships of population, space, and the environment in the Brazilian Amazon. And she is a collaborating researcher at the Laboratory for the Investigation of Socio-Environmental Systems at INPE. So thank you, Anna. Feel free to go ahead.
Obrigada, Rachel. Bom dia a todos e
Thank you,
todas.
Rachel.
Bom, então
Good morning,
vou falar
everybody.
Sobre,
So I'm
componente
going to be talking about the economic component of the Trajetorias dataset. Next.
Bom, então nesse componente
So,
nós temos indicadores.
Within this component, we have populational indicators at the municipal level. We have the urban and rural dimensions. These come from the demographic census conducted by IBGE across the last 2 years. And within these indicators, we have a set of derivative of indicators derivated from multidimensional poverty indexes. So we have the multidimensional poverty incidence and the contribution of each one of the dimensions in the final calculation. So all of these indicators are at the municipal level, and they were calculated for these two periods, which are the periods that we have census data for. We can look at these numbers at the municipal level.
Bom, então o IPM, como o nome já diz,
So,
ele é um índice multidimensional.
The MPI is a multidimensional poverty index, which measures multiple deprivations which each family goes through at a given time. The idea of the MPI is to go beyond the traditional poverty indexes that only look at either income or the consumption capacity of the individuals. So based on the MPI approach, which looks at poverty as a multidimensional phenomenon, and its methodology for it, we built the Trajetorias MPI in order to try to reposition the poverty measures within the Amazon.
Bom, então aqui o anterior, obrigada. Aqui nós temos o processo de construção, né, nessas caixinhas.
Here's the process through which we built our MPI. Our analysis unit are the rural and urban households. We used the microdata of the demographic census from 2000 to 2010. This data comes from the questionnaire of the census. They have 3 dimensions: health, education and living conditions. Within living conditions, we subdivided it into housing and collective services and work and private consumer goods. So we calculated the MPI within the stratums of rural and urban settings. For each dimension, we selected a set of indicators. The selection was done collectively by a pretty large set of interdisciplinary participants. And for each indicator, we defined these stratums, the cutoff, so to say. We mapped these indicators with a 0 to say that it is indicated to no deprivation and 1 for deprivation. The selection of the indicators and the definition of the cutoffs were thought of to better represent these rural and urban stratums based on the data that we can see in the census, on the census microdata from 2000-2010. So we have the MPI calculation for that region. Okay, so this is the whole set of all of the indicators that we worked on in order to build our MPI. They are separated by dimension, and for each one, we have the cutoff point that would represent a situation of deprivation. Within education, these indicators are associated with the schooling of adults and children. As well as for the schooling of the ones who are the breadwinners, so to say. So the households that are considered within deprivation are the ones that had a record of recent deaths, of children between 1 and 5 years old. Within housing. Okay, so within housing and the indicators represent and reflect the characteristics, the structure, the conditions, and the types of these households. In addition, these indicators also represent the presence of basic sanitation and access to water. The last dimension, which is income and private consumer goods, the indicators are associated with the income of the one responsible for the household,
los ingresos del
as well as some
responsables, como por
consumer goods
ejemplo
like
también la presencia de
fridges,
heladeras, televisión,
TVs,
etcétera,
radios, cell phones,
teléfono celular.
and consumer goods for mobility, transportation. So these dimensions were weighted. Each dimension received a weight of 1/4, and for a household to be considered multidimensionally poor, the sum needs to be above 25%.
Para que una persona sea considerada,
Of
tiene que
course,
tener más de
considering that in each dimension, the indicators were also equally weighted. So thinking about multidimensional poverty within the context of our own MPI, a household to be considered multidimensionally poor, it doesn't need deprivation in all of these indicators, but a set of overlapped deprivations. That's why we use this indicator of over 25% in the MPI. So for the municipal level, the MPI will be a combination of two measures, incidence and intensity. So the incidence of multidimensional poverty will tell us how multidimensionally poor they are, how many they are, and the intensity will tell us how multidimensionally poor they are. So we have a calculation for that. It includes the contribution of each one of the dimensions, how much they are contributing for the final calculation.
Aqui, então, nós trouxemos os mapas representando
These are the
as duas
maps
medidas, né, de intensidade,
representing
de
the two
incidência,
measures,
espacialização
incidence and
dessas
intensity,
medidas a nível de
the
município
spread of
para o ano de
the
2010.
spatial spread
Que os
for
mapas representam
2010.
o desvio
The maps
desses
represent
índices
the
em
deviation of these
relação
indexes
à média
in
geral da
comparison with the
Amazônia. Então, quando a
average
gente
of the
olha
Amazon region.
para os indicadores, né,
So when we look at these indicators to these four maps, what we see is that the more red we see, the more red the municipality is, the more disseminated the multidimensional poverty is. So these can be within health, education, and life conditions. So in general terms, the two first maps, they represent the intensity,
da intensidade da pobreza, ou seja, o nível de
the intensity of the poverty, the level of deprivations, which is 32%. And when we look at the cutoff of incidence, we see that the rural incidence is higher than the urban one. So in the rural setting is about 27%. So Roraima, Amazonas, Acre, these are all included, while the average incidence for the urban cutoff is around 7%. And lastly, we have the maps that show, again, another dimension of the MPI. These are from 2010. They represent the spacing and the municipality score for the MPI. We see that the rural MPI is higher. This tells us that in the rural setting, the deprivations are more widespread than in the urban setting. We can highlight the municipalities in the state of the Amazonas, Roraima, Acre, Pará, and part of Maranhão. Just like to highlight that despite the effort that we had to better build an improved poverty indicator, better than the ones that we used before, we are still limited to the available data at the census. These data capture urban data better than they do rural ones, especially in the municipalities in which we see more forest-related characteristic. Municipalities that have an economy centered on the forest and the biome resources. So back to Claudia.
Thank you so much, Anna. We'll now pass back to Claudia, who's going to share some insights about how this data set can be used for policy making.
Obrigada. Bom, assim, a minha função agora é finalizar.
All right, so I believe my role will now be to wrap up and talk about some takeaways. Thank you so much for my colleagues representing very well the complexity of the issue. This data set was built based on a lot of debate, a lot of technical challenges were overcome. They demand solutions at the temporal and scale level, and this dialogue of what's possible through the data is also a product for us to think about different futures in the process of monitoring and systematically collecting data in the country. So in general terms, just to summarize, we have a set of indicators which are economic, environmental, and epidemiological, and then by themselves, they bring about measures that allow us to map the landscapes of the Amazon. There are economic landscapes, so the relationship of people with the environment, how populations use the environment and make use of its resources, and the ecosystemic services. We have the environmental landscape that is ecological in nature as well. As Ana Rorato detailed, there are various indicators of fragmentation, landscape structures, habitats which can be compared with the gray infrastructures such as roads and processes of human occupation, land use, and landscape transformation. And we also have the epidemiological landscapes, which result from the relationship of humans with the environment as well. So this dimension emerges from people's relationship with potential pathogens and factors. It is very much determined by social issues as well as by epidemiological and landscape issues. All of these maps that were presented are available. They are resources that are available at large. In our papers, we have the links for all of these maps. They're in very high quality for publication. They're meant to be used. And now the challenge is for us to go beyond these indicators and integrate the information. Next slide.
Então, algumas iniciativas, né, sim, de proposição, né, que a gente tem feito
proposals are to use methodologies for dimension reduction like PCA for us to be able to create synthetic indicators. So one synthetic indicator that we can obtain from the landscape data is use intensity. So in this map, we have the redder regions are of more intense use, in which we saw more landscape transformation. They saw a higher degree of loss of habitat, and we saw a lot more modification by man in these regions. Next. Okay. So, in this landscape of use intensity, we can relate it to disease. So there are some diseases like leishmaniasis, which are related to the intensity of use, which are different from dengue, for example. I won't go into all of them in detail, but the idea is that we can use new indicators to relate landscapes with health and wealth, and use intensity is an indicator that we can calculate and that can be used in these discussions when we are opting for one or other economic strategy. In addition to measuring GDP and etc., we can also calculate the use intensity of these environments that we are trying to affect, and that will also affect the costs and benefits.
Outro indicador que também resulta de uma análise desses indicadores ambientais
Another indicator that is a result of these environmental indicators is the indication of the change of the landscape and the speed on how it was transformed. The speed on how the landscape is changed will also have an impact in the composition, the environmental composition in the human life, and in the closures of health and waste in that area. So it's a very important indicator that can be used as a monitoring metric for these municipalities. Next one. So we can see here that the areas with higher recent transformation is the area closer to the south of this Amazon region, and this transformation is also associated to different issues, health issues, and severe problems found. And it also has to do with the needs of the population and the aggravations. So when you take a decision of promoting certain economical development, are we really bringing health to the population? Are we really bringing a transformation And is this environmental transformation bringing an environmental health as well? What are the consequences of our decisions, these economic decisions that we usually measure only in terms of income, but it's not funded in other impacts that have to be recognized? On the other hand, there are many life forms in the Amazon forest with a low impact rate, low changes, and they are life forms that have to be recognized. And we need to understand how we can maintain this population there with a healthy life, bringing innovation so that these people can live in the forest in a healthy manner. Next one. So all these indicators, they are available for analysis. We are producing articles still and analysis related to them, but they are already available. We have that in this dashboard that will be fed with new indicators as we create them. And it's a very rich content that you can explore and think on how we can integrate with other dimensions, other problems that may occur within the reality of each one, and make this result alive, because this data by itself doesn't do anything. So thank you very much. And Rachel, I pass it back to you.
Thank you so much, Claudia. Obrigada. That's a wonderful presentation and really fascinating work that you've been doing, and excellent resources. We can see here the links to the article and also a QR code so you can access the dashboard. So now we have time to address some questions to the panelists. So I can see there have been several questions included in the Q&A. Several of them have been answered, so do please feel free to add questions. I think I will start with a few. First of all, I'd like to ask Raquel. Raquel, in a scenario of more frequent extreme climatic events in the Amazon, what would you expect regarding the risk of these vector-borne diseases?
Bom, respondendo de uma forma bem geral, né, sem detalhar pelas doenças.
Well, to answer in a very general way without detailing diseases, one of the greatest impact is related to geographic expansion, depending on how the deploying of these diseases are happening. Besides this geographical expansion, there is a time expansion of favorable conditions throughout the year. For example, a very common example that we use is dengue. Dengue is still considered a summer disease. However, if we have these anomalies, these extreme events changing the climate issue, we can have throughout the year other periods that are favorable to dengue appearance. And actually, we've seen this happening for dengue and for other diseases, and with registered epidemic in periods that we are not expected to. Another thing that is very important that we should think, and is related to geographical and time changes of these diseases, is the system of the health system, because the health system is prepared for one dengue epidemic in one specific period of the year, or an increase of cases in one specific time of the year. But when this changes in time and space, this disturbs the system and impacts very much so in a quick response in terms of health management. So we have this big challenge, how to prepare our health system to respond to these changes. And I believe that thinking about health, this is one of the biggest challenges that we have when we are studying the impact of climate and environmental and economical social issues in health.
Obrigada, Raquel.
Thank you.
That's great. I now have a question for Ana Rorato. In what areas of the Amazon region would you say that environmental conservation seems to have been successful?
Well, this question is very interesting because the Amazon region is very heterogeneous related to environmental impacts, conservation policies that are broader, environmental policies that are federal, state policies. So it depends on how each state is strict enough to apply these policies. And we also have special areas designated to bigger environmental protection and conservation. Within these areas, we are talking about indigenous lands, conservation units, and other type of protected areas that are special and already have, as by definition, a bigger environmental protection. Although these areas are subjected to invasions, illegal occupations, deforestation, mining, illegal mining. And as I mentioned in the presentation, we've seen different processes throughout the last decades. So we were coming from a intense deforestation period and intense environmental degradation. There was a policy application that was very efficient to decrease this environmental impact, and they did. And these results were worldwide considered a great event, a great potential event in terms of decreasing deforestation. And then we saw the impact, the negative impact picking up again when we actually didn't have a policy for this protection of the environmental area of the Amazon. And now we have again a new policy of trying to take better care of this area. And when we see the indigenous lands and we talk about this struggle this last year with this change on the political scenario, we've seen a lot of improvement regarding the rights of indigenous lands and their protection from the federal government. But on the other hand, the the legislative power, the Congress and the Senate, they have not done so. They've been attacking and making it more fragile to the indigenous people because they want to explore the agro and the mining still. And when we think about the Amazon, when we add indigenous lands and protected areas, we have a block of approximately 50% of the region. So approximately 50% of the region of the forest, the Amazon forest, are now currently protected by this mosaic of special areas. And as we see this attempt of fragilizing this area, weakening this area, we think how impactful environmentally and socially it can be and represent a disaster for the biodiversity of the region, the ecosystemic services, the water, as Claudia presented very well in the beginning. And there's also the relation to the economic strategies that are dominant in the region. So we have the areas, the region, for example, of the arch of the deforestation, where you have a deforestation that is consolidated and the economic strategies are dominant and see the soil as a resource. And you have a place where the forest is actually an obstacle to be overcome. So you have the forest only there to allow the use of soil. And on the other hand, the Amazon region has a predominance of economic strategy regarding the protection of the forest. So you have a familiar, a family, economy, and a diversity of strategies to provide the income of these families by protecting and by using the proper use of the forest. So when we divide the Amazon region in two, we understand how crucial it is to think what are the best policies that can be more successful in terms of being positive for the conservation of the biodiversity and the water in the region. So those are the main topics that we can approach when talking about this subject.
Muito obrigada, Ana. It's really interesting. Now let's move to Ana Paula. Anna, can we apply the MPI poverty index to other areas of the Amazon region, for example, in other countries like Colombia or Peru or Ecuador?
Sim, nós podemos, porque,
yes, we can. Because
no IPM Trajetórias,
as we have,
IPM
we
trajectories,
can
we've
adapt the
adapted the
methodology. As I said,
and
we
thought
think
about
on indicators, which are the indicators
that would best
represent each situation, and also
cut points,
the cutting points
and
and the
especially
data points.
the data
We may
source.
apply
It is
all
possible
that
to
the
apply in
countries.
other
We
countries,
have
but
to
it's
make the
necessary to make
adjustments
these
that are
adjustments.
necessary, which are the
Thinking about
dimensions that would be
what are the
represented
dimensions
in
that
other
would
countries,
best represent
and the data
these
sources
countries
we may
and the
have
source of
to
data
choose the
to
best
better
indicators
choose
and
the indicators
dimensions.
and dimensions. The
This
IPM
methodology is a flexible
methodology
one,
is a
so
very
it is
flexible one,
possible
so it's
to
possible to
adjust
do adjustment of
weight
dimensions,
indicators and
weight,
so on. So it is
indicator.
possible
So yes,
to
it is
apply
possible
considering
to indicate,
those
to
adaptation
apply,
questions and choosing
thinking
the
about the
best
best
indicators on
choices
the basis of the data
indicators
sources
that would best represent
represent
the reality of
better
each
the reality
country
of each
and
country,
its specificities
specific
and particularities.
particularities
you,
of the
Anna.
countries. Thank you, Anna.
Great. And Claudia, could you tell us a little bit about your plans to update the data set and how this kind of data could feed into other initiatives?
Thank you. Obrigada pela pergunta.
Thank you for your question.
Esse dataset,
Well, this data set
ele precisa estar,
needs
ele
to,
atualmente, né, é bom lembrar,
currently it's good
ele
to remind everyone,
construído com a
it is
intenção de ser
built
atualizado
with the
de 10
intention
em
of
10
being
anos, porque ele é
updated
pensado
every 10
na
years,
escala da economia,
because it's thought about the
na escala
it's
dos
thought
processos
within the
lentos,
economic
que são os
scale,
processos que
the
são
slow
do
processes
desenvolvimento das
of
políticas públicas ligadas à
development and
economia,
public
né?
policies
Então, ele tem
related
essa
to the
atualização
economy. So this has
de 10 em
this
10 anos,
10-year
pensando também que os
update,
dados vêm
thinking also that
majoritariamente do
this
censo
data come
demográfico,
in a
que também
majority
ocorre
from
de
a
10 em 10
demographic
anos,
sense
e do
that happens
censo
every 10 years,
agropecuário,
and
que
the
também ocorre
agro
de 10
sense
em 10 anos, né?
that
O
also
censo
occurs every 10 years.
demográfico ocorre
The
no início
demographic
da
sense
década, de cada década, e o
begins,
censo
the
agropecuário
census
é no
begin
meio
at the
de
beginning
cada
of every
década.
decade, and
Então,
the
existe essa
agro
necessidade
census is in the middle of
dessa
every
periodicidade,
decade.
né?
So
Então,
there's no
nós
need for this
fizemos essas
periodicity.
medidas, os indicadores,
So
para
we
a primeira década
understand
dos
that
anos
the
2000,
indicators
para
that
a
we did
segunda
for the
década,
first
e
decade
agora a
of the
gente
2000s,
vai
and then
partir
for the
para
second one, and now we're going to move on
na
to
medida
an
em que
update
saem os novos dados do
as new
censo
data
demográfico,
will
que já foi
come
feito,
out
né?
of
Ele
the
precisa ser
demographic
agora
census
disponibilizado
that has
na
already been done
resolução
and now
mais
needs to be
detalhada, e também o
made
censo
available in a more
agropecuário, que virá a
detailed
ser feito, eu
version, and
espero,
also the agro census
daqui a
that will
alguns
be
anos, né?
carried
Então,
on, I
assim, a
hope
intenção
so,
é essa,
in the next
mas
few
nada
years. So that's the
impede
intention,
que
but
as
nothing
pessoas que queiram trabalhar, elas
will
possam
not allow us to
relacionar
work
esses indicadores que são
on
mais assim,
relating these
tendência com indicadores
indicators
mais
of
rápidos, né? Por exemplo,
threads, of tens,
usando esses
to
nossos como baseline, a
by
partir do
using
qual posso
our
discutir
process as a
processos mais
baseline
rápidos,
to
epidemias,
discuss
por
a
exemplo,
faster process
de
of
doenças,
epidemics
ou
and diseases,
informações
for
rápidas de
example, or
paisagem, como
transformations
essas
of
anomalias
landscapes,
climáticas
such
ou
as these
desastres
climate
ambientais,
anomalies
esses eventos
or
podem ser
environmental disasters.
analisados dentro
This
desse contexto mais
can be analyzed within
caracterizado
this
pelo
context,
trajetórias.
but
E aí
is
tem grande
characterized by
uma
trajetorias.
oportunidade, né,
So there's a great opportunity to aggregate our indicators, other indicators, to harmonize this data with others. The Harmonize has this idea that Rachel has been leading, and we are part of this project that has your leadership and that has this perspective of thinking that if you want to generate public policies, we need to work with harmonization of data. And this harmonization can be done in different scales, in different resolutions. There are issues that are more local, more global, quick responses, or more structural responses. And this is what is going to generate this opportunity of thinking differently. And I think that's what this synthesis centers and these multidisciplinary studies can generate, which is to think differently about the problems that we are facing. So we want to update this, and we want this data to be integrated with other database in a modular way and growing as well.
Thank you, Claudia, and thank you for mentioning the Harmonized project. I just shared a link to our new website that we're about to launch, so please do feel free to take a look, and all the panelists are members of the Harmonized project, and we're looking forward to incorporating the Trajetorias work with the new Harmonized project, so thank you. Okay, so I can see that all our panelists have been responding in the Q&A and answering a lot of the questions. So I was wondering if any of our panelists would like to respond or elaborate on any of the questions that were posed in the Q&A. For example, we have a question about if the forest maps exclude the national parks and conservation areas. Perhaps Ana Rorato, you might want to comment on that.
Yes.
Yes, we consider the entire forest coverage of the municipality. So that would include forests that are located within reservations, indigenous reserves, conservation units, and other categories. Another is the suggestion of including the forest within these areas. But since our objective was to calculate these indicators at the municipal level, our idea was to characterize indicators that had an overhead perspective of the environmental side. I don't believe the environmental characterization would be a bias, because the forests have a role in the maintenance of biodiversity and ecosystemic services of each municipality.
Thank you, Anna. We had another question here. Claudia, would you like to comment a little bit more about the implementation of the hydroelectric plant and how this kind of data could help with measuring those kind of events in the future?
Sim, sim. Essa questão de Belo Monte, né, como exemplo de uma infraestrutura de grande escala,
it's an example of a large-scale structure which was built with the intention of using the environmental resource of the region, in this case water, to generate energy.
É grande desafio porque a energia hídrica, ela tem
It is a challenge because hydropower is usually seen as green energy, clean energy, but we are very well aware of the huge social impact that they generate in their location. In the case of Belo Monte, it is much more extreme.
Eu acompanhei bastante a questão do impacto no Xingu e todos, né?
I'm very much aware of the impact of Xingu, Altamira, the negative consequences that the impact of these large projects have, the social vulnerability that they generate, and usually that's not factored in, you know?
As coisas não são feitas de uma forma pactuada exatamente, né?
Because things are not usually agreed upon. There are many interests involved. But in the point of view of Trajetorias and how we can contribute to be able to measure that. Our indicators are very detailed. They measure environmental fragmentation, forest degeneration. They will have health indicators. They have indicators for deprivation in the families. This is historically calculated as well, and as these are calculated again for the new census, we'll be able to have a before and after picture to be able to objectively assess the impact. But of course, the impact is much beyond what we can measure. It's very important for us to always be aware that new indicators will be necessary in the future, and the debate is open, of course. We need to think with the populations about what we should be measuring, specifically in each location. And in the case of Belo Monte, the power plant, I saw beautiful work by the indigenous communities that they monitor their own fishing efforts, showing how much the fish stock of the region dropped and how that impacts the food security of these populations as a result of the implementation of the hydropower plant. So that type of indicator needs to be given more prominence. I believe that these initiatives of synthesis, data sharing, and knowledge exchange will be able to allow that to happen.
Obrigada, Claudia. And we had another question about the sort of huge reduction in green cover that was shown in the presentation. And Anna, would you mind just sharing a bit more information about how you calculated that change in land cover?
The question is about the land use cover change?
Yes, so you did answer in the chat, but perhaps you could just elaborate a little bit about the way that you calculated these indicators at the municipal level and how you made that calculation for that change in land cover.
Okay. Nós usamos mapas.
All right, so basically, we calculate these indicators for 2 years, 2006 and 2017, which are our time series, our time thresholds concerning the agricultural census. So based on these 2 time series, we harmonized all of the other data sets for creating the indicators themselves. So the land coverage data were calculated based on different sources of open databases. For agriculture and cattle raising, we used the classified maps of land use and coverage, which were produced by INPE, our spatial research institute. It has a project developed by Professor Gilberto Câmara that has annual maps at different classes of land coverage and use. So we use these maps for feeding our agriculture and cattle raising data. For the mining data, the mining indicator rather, we use the data made available by Mapbiomas, which are also maps of use and coverage that are updated yearly. This is a consortium of institutions in Brazil that develop these maps. And for all of the indicators, we calculated the percentage of area of the municipality on that year that was covered by this use class. We also have the urban area that was calculated by Mapbiomas, and for remaining forests, we use the PRODS data. Every year, PRODS generates a map with the deforestation increment of the Amazon region, and in this map, we can see the remaining forest. So that indicator was calculated based on that data. And the secondary forests, it also comes from the Professor Gilberto Câmara's team. All of that information is in our paper. We describe how each indicator is calculated, what are the data sources, And in our repository in Zenodum, which can be found in the paper, you can access it through a link. In it, you can see all of the CSV tables where users can access all of that information. They can download it. You can see the metadata, the references, and the indicators themselves. And just to answer another question that I saw in the chat, it was on the use of data for a stratum. As our indicators are for the entire legal Amazon, and they are separated by municipality, you can have that stratum done by state or any other delimitation of your interest. So you can work on that information in accordance to your own.
Muito obrigada, Ana. I just have one last question for Ana Paula. Ana, could you just tell us a little bit about your experience working in this interdisciplinary environment and working between sort of earth science and with economists?
Obrigado, Rachel, pela pergunta.
Thank you so much, Rachel, for the question. It's a very interesting question because the challenge of your working in this interdisciplinary field and building indicators is to think about data that allows us to build a narrative that's different than the one that has been in place and in the mainstream of the Amazon up until now, which have consolidated many thought processes, like, for example, where we have economies focused on the biome, or we have the agro forest processes, extractivism, and how it's related to poverty and development. So the idea is that development is where the agribusiness is. And the challenge is that for us to think about indicators that provide visibility, as Claudia said, to these economies, to these areas, to these populations, which show that there's an entire region that's occupied, and we need to think about policies and alternatives, well, not alternatives, but policies for these populations that strike this balance between health and forest conservation, which is the basis for the lives of these populations. In addition to that challenge of building these indicators, we need to look at the available databases that we have. Because, for example, the demographic census, they are much more focused on the urban settings. So I believe that this interdisciplinary experience has revealed to me that the challenge is even greater than I thought before. How we can bring these two aspects into the same basket based on the data that we have in order to build new narratives for the Amazon region in the context of the issue that we need to give more visibility to these economies which are based on the biome's resources.
Obrigada, Ana. Thank you very much. A stimulating presentation from everyone. So I think it's time to bring the webinar to a close. I'd like to thank you all for your participation. Thank you so much to our panel members for these very insightful presentations. The recording of the session, along with additional materials, will be shared. You'll be able to find the link to this in the chat. So thank you once again to our panelists for your participation, and we'll now close the session. Thank you. Obrigada.
Obrigada. Thank you, Rachel.
Obrigada.
Obrigada.
Obrigada, gente. Foi muito legal mesmo.